Hi everyone, really excited to be here, and a huge thanks goes out to Lima for the opportunity to talk inside her Global Speaker Spotlight. So I'm going to start off by asking a question. Now, it's a seemingly easy question, but this one question does have a habit of unearthing some deeply held beliefs, which is really what I want to talk about today. As I say, the question is an innocent one on the surface, so let's see how this lands. Tell me in the chat, if you want to, why did you start your business? Now, I'll ask that question again, making sure that I put the emphasis on the right word, because I am really trying to get to something here. Why did you start your business? Why did you start your business in the first place? What was your why? Now, I'm not looking for the polished Instagram and LinkedIn why, but the real honest, raw why. Because when I ask this to the women that I work with, when I ask that one question, they give me all manner of technical answers and family reasons and all sorts of things to begin with. But when I start to dig, what I find is that for a lot of women, their why lies in the motivation to have more freedom. Now, freedom takes many guises, but time freedom, the choice about how we spend our time, is overwhelmingly the number one reason why women start their business, even if that is buried somewhere in their first answer. But what I can be absolutely certain of is that none of you started your business because you wanted longer hours. I can't imagine any of you set out to be answering emails at 10 o'clock at night and holding client conversations on a Sunday evening. I don't suppose any of you wanted to spend every vacation checking your phone. So if freedom was your why, then my next question is, how is that working out for you? And, let me know in the chat how the freedom part of running your business is going for you. Because when you add all of this up, the lack of freedom, the long hours, the time spent away from your family, you might find yourself asking the question, why do I do it? And I think for entrepreneurs with existing hectic businesses, the answer is actually quite simple. What else can I do? And, you may have noticed this yourself. The more successful your business becomes, the less time freedom you seem to have. You've got more clients, maybe more turnover, more responsibility, more people relying on you. But what you don't have is more time, more headspace, and more choice. Does any of that sound familiar? Do let me know in the chat if any of this is feeling familiar. Because what's interesting is if it does sound familiar, the standard business, the traditional business advice is great. You're doing well, keep it up, maybe just work a bit harder. We've been sold the lie that running your own business must be hard work. You must work long hours and you must deal with everything yourself. But what if you want to grow your business? What if you want scale? What if you want to build something that has a value to someone else? That's where the trap is. Because firstly, if there's only one of you, one person can't scale. And secondly, when you set out to build your business, when you first set yourself up in business, that took a current version of you and that required hard work. The next chapter is growth and scale, in which case that's going to require a different version of you. You cannot scale by working hard. You can't scale if you're the bottleneck. Now, if you want scale, maybe not everybody does, but if you do, you will have to build differently. And that's really what I want to explore with you today. Business architecture. Now, don't worry, I'm not talking about organizational charts and process maps. What I am talking about is the invisible structure underneath every business. It's the bit that nobody really talks about. So here's what I think. Working harder doesn't create freedom. Working harder doesn't create scale. And if it doesn't create scale, it can't create wealth. Actually, I'd even go as far as to say, working hard is the very thing that creates the ceiling to your business. Therefore, the way to build freedom and scale and wealth is to build differently. Now, before we get into that, let me just introduce myself. I'm Zoe Price. I am the founder of the Be Your Own Rich Man movement and author of Be Your Own Rich Man. And I started Be Your Own Rich Man because I want more women building businesses that create wealth, not just income. Because so much of the world's wealth is controlled by such a small proportion of people, often men. So let's get back to it. I'm a very visual person, so this is really how I think about it. So imagine that we were standing on the road outside two beautiful houses that were next to each other. And from the outside, they're identical. Same size, same finish, same beautiful kitchen and gorgeous garden. Now, you'd probably assume, like I would, that they were worth the same amount of money. Then someone tells you something important. One house is built on solid foundations. The other was built on sand. Now, if I was to ask you now, which one would you buy? It would be an obvious answer, wouldn't it? Because once you know that the foundations are compromised, nothing else really matters. And yet that's exactly what we do in business. We obsess over the visible things like marketing and sales and social media and websites and funnels, the latest strategy. Those are all important things, but hardly anyone stops to ask, what is holding all this up? What is the business actually built on? Here's what I've noticed. Most businesses aren't limited by marketing, sales, social media content. Businesses are far more likely to be limited by their architecture. And architecture is invisible. You can't see it on a website or a social media platform. But this is what I think. Business architecture is the invisible design that determines how your business creates value, how it captures value, and ultimately how it can become valuable itself. It's the invisible decisions that you've made along the way about things like how customers find you, why they would choose you, how you deliver your value to them, the way that money flows through your business, and how much of the daily operations actually depend on you. And perhaps more importantly, whether every new customer makes your business stronger or makes it more dependent on you. Now, for someone who studied this intently, and I can tell you I have, here's what I found fascinating. Two businesses can, say, both be turning over, let's say, $500,000 a year. One owner works 3 days a week. The other hasn't had a proper holiday in 5 years. Same revenue, completely different architecture. And for me, I think it gets even more interesting when you think that the business is not what's trapped the owner. The design has. Which means that if design created the problem, design can create the solution. But I think what's happening is most entrepreneurs don't realize that they are designing their business. They think they're just making decisions. Yes, I'll take on that client. Yes, I think I'll create that service. I'm going to answer all these emails myself. I'm just going to do that one thing because it's quicker if I do it myself. Now, individually, none of those decisions seem particularly important, but collectively, over time, you're designing the architecture of your business, whether you realize it or not. Every single decision either makes the business stronger and more valuable, or more dependent on you and then therefore less attractive to a potential buyer. So, put simply, every decision either builds an asset or builds another job. I don't believe that businesses become trapped overnight. I think they become trapped one decision at a time. So, if that's the problem, I guess the obvious question is, what decisions should we be making instead? So let's just recap. If working harder isn't the answer, and if better marketing isn't the answer, and if our decisions or our decision making is either helping us or hurting us, what do we do? Actually, the answer is surprisingly simple. What you need to do is stop thinking like the person who's running the business, so the COO or the CEO, the operations director, and start thinking like the person who's designing it. So the owner, the investor, the architect, because that's a huge difference. So, for example, a normal operator would ask, what do I need to do next? Whereas an architect will ask, what needs to exist so I don't always have to do it? Can you see the difference? One is focusing on activity, so the output. The other is focusing on design, the outcome. And once you start thinking like an architect, every decision changes. So instead of asking, how do I get another client? The architect starts asking, will the next client make this business stronger or more dependent on me? That's the lens that you need to start looking at your business through. So another example of, maybe an operator would say, how do I increase revenue? The architect would instead ask, will this extra revenue increase the value of the business itself? Which actually could mean saying no to some clients. An operator would say, how do I fit more into my week? The architect would say, does the business need me to do all of this? So hopefully you can see that pattern now. If you ask different questions, what that powers is different decisions. Because here's the truth. Every decision you make is either building an asset or building a job. There's no neutral. Every decision will either move you towards a business that is capable of creating scale and wealth, or you're building a business that simply creates more work. Now, does this mean that you never have to work hard? Of course not. Every business takes hard work, especially at the beginning, because hard work is what builds something. Where the trap starts to appear is when hard work becomes the business model. There's a big difference. One will create momentum, but the other creates a treadmill. And I think too many entrepreneurs, and I did this myself, accidentally build themselves very successful treadmills. They're running faster than ever before. They might be making more money than ever before. They're most likely working harder than ever before. But what they're doing is running and not making any progress. And here is the irony. The thing that they wanted when they started their business was more choice, more control, more freedom. That's exactly what I wanted when I set out on my last business. But that starts to feel further and further away. So I'd like to leave you with a question. Now, this isn't a question for you to answer to me, but it is a question that I think every business owner should be asking themselves regularly. So when you are about to make your next business decision, ask yourself this question. Does this decision increase the value of my business or simply increase my workload? If you start asking yourself that question often enough, you'll stop building a business that's based on everything being you, and you'll start building one that's capable of creating the freedom, the scale, and the wealth that you always wanted. So where do we go from here? So if today's conversation has made you think differently about your business, which was the aim, then I'd love to carry on the conversation, because we have absolutely only scratched the surface today. So if you'd like to explore these ideas in more depth, there are 3 places that I'd encourage you to start. Firstly is my book, Be Your Own Rich Man, which will be published at the end of this month. It explores these ideas in much more detail and looks at why so many entrepreneurs accidentally build a business that generates income but never wealth. Secondly, I'd love for you to join me in the Be Your Own Rich Man community. It's where I share ideas, I challenge conventional thinking, and we have really honest, open conversations with ambitious women who want to build differently. And there's nothing better than having a network of like-minded, ambitious women by your side when you're building. I'm also running a live masterclass at the end of this month where I go into much more detail about topics like business architecture, authority, designing businesses that create wealth, and why I absolutely firmly believe that design beats hustle every time. So if today's talk has left you with more questions than answers, then I consider I've done my job, because that's exactly where change begins. So thank you so much, all of you, for listening, and to Lima for inviting me. I'm Zoe Price, and I would love to connect with you afterwards.